Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a sequel of a previous lesson from the 22nd chapter in Proverbs. This marks a distinct literary transition where Solomon launches into the 30 sayings of the wise, which stretches all the way till the 22nd verse of the 24th chapter. But before that, what we read in the 22nd verse is nothing but the facts of life. We're going to go over every one of them just briefly. A name is preferable to great riches. You may argue otherwise, but it is a fact that your character, that's what a name means in the Hebrew translation, is of greater value than any riches. And grace is better than silver and gold. You cannot put a price tag on grace, but you can put one on silver and gold. The rich and the poor meet together. Yahweh is the master of them all. This is a fact of life, that even though there's an aristocratic element of socioeconomics, but there's a democracy about birth and a democracy of death. The democracy of death is that it comes to us all. No man, comes to us all, and it makes us all equal when it comes. Verse 3, a clever one foresees evil and hides himself, but the simple go on and are punished. This is a fact of life, that those who are prudent and circumspect and exercise discretion will have foresight, which will anticipate disasters before they invite themselves upon them. So they're not going to invite the disaster upon them, where the fool will walk around in blissful ignorance, not even knowing that he is walking into trouble and danger, the simple that is, and they have to be punished, but the punishment can be of remedial and educative value to the simple. Pain is an effective enforcer of certain lessons, more so than words or persuasion, especially for the simple one. The reward of humility is the fear of Yahweh, riches and esteem in life. So this is not exactly a fact of life. This is one of the differences where we read of what I've been communicating so often. The main interpretive guideline to Proverbs is not to look for promises, but look for principles. So this is not a fact of life. Not every person is in there, but it continues the theme I've been expounding on. Thorns, snares are in the ways of the perverse. He who guards his life keeps far away from them. So if you guard your life, you're going to have prudence and foresight and anticipation of certain dangers. You're going to reorient and direct your paths to paths that stay away from this stuff. But, if you are perverse, that means you are perverse in heart, perverse in language, and perverse in character. Your life is going to be filled with snares, largely of your own making, from your lack of preparatory anticipation. And then verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he turns not away from it. This is a principle, not a fact of life, because Solomon himself invalidates the promise of this, because he was raised in a godly household. His father David was a man after God's own heart by the words of him himself, and in Acts 13:22, but Solomon, for the most better part of his life, all the way up to the 10th chapter in the book of Kings, he is living righteously in the footsteps of his father. Then almost inexplicably in the 11th chapter, we witness that he was in love with many of his foreign wives, and he permitted them, he submitted to their worship of idols, and that did, so it did not end well for him. But if you want to have, if you hope and expect, if you want to have an upright son, the fact of life is that you have to train them, and dedicate is alternately a translation of that word train. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. This is a fact of life. People who have more resources can dominate and control those who have less. And the Hebrew law, they were permitted to charge interest on loans to Gentiles, but not to Hebrews. So there were laws in the Mosaic covenant that minimized and prohibited economic exploitation. He who sows unrighteousness reaps trouble, and the rod of his wrath perishes. So this is the Hindu equivalent. They have a term, karma, which is their version of a moral law of cause and effect, and this is a fact of life, that if you sow unrighteousness, unrighteousness brings nothing but trouble, so you're going to invite trouble into your life if you are sowing unrighteousness. That means spreading it. Wherever you go, you bring it with you. And he who has a good eye is blessed, for he gives of his bread to the poor. This is a fact of life, that when we give to the poor, we are investing in our Maker. That does not mean that he is obliged to reward us financially, but we are paying to him, and it is noted when we give of our alms to the poor. Cast out the scoffer, and the strife goes out, and contention and shame ceases. This is a fact of life. The mocker and the scoffer is the root cause of all strife and contention and violence. So if you don't even invite them, if you go out of your way to exclude them, you are diverting trouble that is both preventable and avoidable by not even associating with such types. He who loves cleanness of heart, whose speech is pleasant, a king is his friend. This was a fact of his life. Now, not every monarch was different, but Solomon was certainly an idealized king who reigned during the golden age of Israel, the United Kingdom. So he surrounded himself with these types of voices and these types of advisors and these types of input, pleasant speech. The eyes of Yahweh shall watch over knowledge, but he overthrows the word of the treacherous. This is a fact of life. He is an omnipresent, omniscient being. He knows all. He sees all. Even our innermost secret, he weighs the hearts and judges the motives and intentions of the heart. And the words of the treacherous, these words are weapons, but he's going to overthrow their weapons through his own superior sovereign strength. The lazy one said, this isn't really a fact of life. This is a hyperbole which caricatures a lazy man who just invents excuses to not go out, ridiculous ones, such as a lion being in the street. I'm not going to make it if I go out to work. Then 15, folly is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline drives it far from him. This is a fact of life, and I think it's shameful that in the concept and expansion of what constitutes child abuse has been expanded to not physically striking them, because pain and suffering registers more effectively and more thoroughly in the mind of a child than reason, logic, or persuasion. So they have folly, they're bound up in the heart. The only way to get it out sometimes is to beat it out. But watch out for the lawman these days, because those kids snitch on you, you're done. Two more folly is one oppresses the poor to increase, another gives to the rich, only to come to poverty. So that doesn't necessarily connect with our facts of life scheme. We've probably spent enough time. This marks the beginning of the lesson itself, verse 17. Incline your ears and hear the words of the wise, and apply your heart to my knowledge. So he's summoning their ears to hear and listen and learn, but not only learn and listen, but also apply. So the conceptual knowledge of moral living is useless if not applied. So we have to put our heart, we have to invest our heart. We got to genuinely, the heart wants what the heart wants. So we have to apply our hearts to the knowledge that he can bring, he can provide. He is overall, and he is an omniscient. This is the attribute of infinite or unlimited intelligence. So Solomon's knowledge is derived from him, but is not the same thing as himself. For they are pleasant if you keep them within you. Let all them be ready on your lips. So there's a source of pleasantry and delight in spiritual sustenance and nourishment in delighting and keeping these words within you, and always have one on the ready of your lips. And this is especially incumbent for those who are engaged in spiritual warfare. And I think if you're not really a Christian, but there is a battle raging around us and sometimes within us. And one of the ways that the demons, if you're being tempted, that means that a demon is tempting you. And the best way to overcome that temptation is to have a word of the sword of the Spirit on your lips at that moment of time. This is what we witness in the Messiah, who threw the book at the adversary, 3 citations from the book of Deuteronomy. And this was a literal encounter with the devil. This is not a normative Christian experience, but Martin Luther was also encountered by the devil. And you know what the sword of the Spirit he used to drive away from him. The devil kept piling on his sins since he was 5 years old, since he was 7 years old. He was laying them out all around and out in front of him because he is an accuser. And Luther said, "Is that all?" And he goes, No, there's many more. That's what he sneered. And then Luther said, "Now, beneath them all, the blood of the Messiah, which cleanses us from all iniquity." And the devil went away. That's why it's good to have a word on the tip of your tongue, to be so saturated in walking in the word and growing and learning and living from the word, that it's always have an answer on the tip of your tongue for whenever the opportunity presents itself to give a testimony of your hope as well. So this is useful both with demons and humans, to have a word of Scripture on the tip of your tongue, or ready on your lips. Lips, tongues, and mouth are all connected to speech. There's nothing significant in the physical organs themselves, just the words that come out from our mouth. That your trust might be in Yahweh, I cause you to know today, even you. So his whole purpose and motivation is to instill in his son to trust Yahweh, and that we have to stop trusting ourselves to provide our own provisions and to give our lives ultimate meaning and satisfaction. We have to trust. We have to turn it up in trust and faith and prayer to him, that we might find the satisfaction that every natural person seeks. The problem is they're seeking it in all the wrong places. They're seeking it in sin. They're steeped in Satan's territory, and but we who follow the straight and narrow must know better, because broad is the way to death and destruction. Have I not previously written to you of counsels and knowledge? So he's reminding him that he has already written. This is a book and he identifies him as early as the 8th verse of the 1st chapter. So this is a reference to everything that's come before. This is a distinct literary transition. Beginning in the 17th verse, this marks the 30 sayings of the wise, and I have them numbered out in chapter 24, but I don't have them. But some of them are 2 sentences, and we might read them in the chunk. But some of them are singular sentences. We'll take it as we lie. But he is once more reminding him that he is already given him the foundation for the understanding that he is adding to on here. So the value is in reading the book and the order in it is presented. And the best way to do that is to read a single chapter from this book every day. It will guide and govern your daily practical living. Even non-believers can benefit from the reading of a single proverb a day. It will give you the insights to respond how you are righteously wherever you are. To cause you to know with certainty of the words of truth, to return words of truth to those who send to you. So this is the goal and the expectation of the teacher. His goal is to make his student able to spread the seed that he has planted in him. We are to make disciples who make disciples. It is a multiplication process. To approach evangelism from a singular lens is to miss the meaning of the mark. We have to make the disciples. We cannot do hit and runs. We have to guide the people. We have to edify the ones we evangelize. We can't just leave them, just coming as they are with a conviction and then not knowing what they're getting into. We have to, we can know with the certainty of truth. The Spirit illuminates that which pertains to the Spirit. So it is through spiritual intuition that we affirm the certainty of these words of truth, and every single verse that we read from Genesis 1 all the way to Revelation 22 is truth. And we have a duty and obligation to send the truth to those and return it. So we have to keep in contact with the ones who have sort of spiritually monitored our progress in our walk with God. Do not rob the poor because he is poor, and oppress not the afflicted at the gate. So the temptation for rich people was to economically exploit poor people because they could. They had the leverage to pay bribes in the court of justices, which allowed them to steal their lands and drive them out and reduce them to ruins. But Solomon was wealthy enough not to have to do it, and he told people not to do it. This was a temptation for the rich and the kings, and this was mostly society-wide by the writings of the prophets, which takes place, the majority of the written prophets take place during the divided kingdom period, post-Solomon. But this is once more embodied and reflected in the Mosaic law. Yahweh has a concern for the poor and the most vulnerable about them, and the afflicted is one who is diseased, and they would have been, at the gates, so they wouldn't be allowed into society. They would be oppressed at the gates, but he's telling them to rise and above upon the law of iron and embrace the law of mercy, such situation arise. For Yahweh pleads their cause, and they shall plunder those who plunder them. So Yahweh is the creator and controller, and his economy is exponentially more just than human economy. Money isn't real. It only has the power that we imagine it to have, and it is really almost a species of witchcraft that has reduced our mind to thinking that these bills of paper printed by our government have actual value, but they are valuable in the world, but they're of no significance to the Christian. But if you are poor, you do have a powerful ally. If you are economically exploited, Yahweh will remember and he will reward you accordingly. So at the judgment, there's going to be a tipping of justice. All rights will be wrongs, all property returned to its rightful owner. So his economy and his justice is better than man's, which allows the rich to fleece the poor and everything else. Make no friendship with one given to wrath, and do not go with a man of rage. So angry people are not ideal associates, because when they are angry, that means they are prone to violence, they are prone to violent verbal contentions, and prone to just get themselves into trouble and speak, just have their mouths lead them into trouble, and anyone who's with them is sinking in the same boat by connection of them. So stay away from them. Find in a friend something you want or admire. There's nothing to want and admire about a life that is so governed by anger that they are unable to have a pleasant time, and they have to bring their misery wherever they go on their others. So there is a contagious element in anger, and we want to stay away from it ourselves and not succumb to its temptations. Lest you learn his ways and find yourselves ensnared. So the consequences of surrounding yourselves with certain people and influences is that show me your friends and I'll show you your future. Who we associate with, what we value, will have an investment into eternity. So we want to bear that in mind when we, invest what we have wisely and prudently. Do not be the one who shakes hand in a pledge, or of those who are guarantors for debts. So the practice of vouching financially for a friend, you put it on your own name that he was good for his debt, that was a dangerous practice that Solomon instructs his son and his audience and his reader to exercise caution in reference towards that specific situation. And but don't be a guarantor for a stranger or anyone you're not willing to absolutely vouch on. In friendship, the fact of vouchers could ruin friendships. There was a deadly potential. So he's not telling him all the way to do away with it, but only be careful who you vouch for. If you vouch for anyone at all, you are vouching on your honor and for their honor too. That is a serious consequence which extends beyond the self of the one from whom it emanates. If you do not have the means to pay, why should he take away your bed from under you? So by law and by the law of economics, if you don't have the means to pay, the rich man is able, or the owner or the proprietor of the lodging house you are in where your bed is, they have every legal and economic right to deny you that bed. But I feel once more that Solomon is appealing to a more exalted principle of mercy should such a situation arise. Do not move the ancient boundary which your fathers have established. So the ancient boundaries were settled in the days of Joshua. These were the tribal allocations of the land of the promise, and we can read of their divisions and distributions in the final 12 chapters of the 24-chapter book of Joshua. So they would have been recognized and restored at the year of Jubilee. Every original property would return to its original owner. So that was one of the mechanisms, the economic mechanisms in the Mosaic Law that prevented an extreme exploitation, or an excessive one at that. And, it was connected to something that was eternal implicitly. Do you see a man who is skilled in his work? He stands before kings. He does not stand before obscure ones. So we can connect this to a truth in earlier scripture. This was Joseph. He stood before kings because he was skilled in reading and predicting dreams and interpreting them, and that brought him in prison. He was there on a phony charge of rape when he had sexually resisted the advances of his master's wife. The master, he was instantly and efficiently competent, so the master raised him as the his chief trusted lieutenant, and then his wife screams rape, so he finds himself in prison. There he meets a baker and a candle lighter in the employ of Pharaoh, and he interprets the dream for them, and then the one who was given his life and the one who had predicted would survive, he asked him to tell of him, but he wasn't until he was in proximity to the Pharaoh that the Pharaoh had a troubling dream. Joseph stood before the king, and he was skilled in his work. He did something no one else could do. No one else was given the gift that he had to interpret dreams, and the existence of these dreams were a source of troublesome troublesomeness to his 11 brothers, who didn't like it when he told them that he saw visions of 11 stars bowed before the sun, or 12, I think, so his father was included in that. But sure enough, that came to pass. But that's all the time we have for today. So if you want to be skilled in your work, you might stand before kings. It doesn't mean you will, but you might. So never say never in reference to Christianity, the Christian walk, the Christian life. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.